All right, y'all, we are down to our penultimate lecture. That's second to last. Y'all probably know that because you're pretty smart. But our second to last lecture here, talking about managing sprawl. So you only have to deal with this one and one more, and you can focus on doing the work. So I'm sure y'all are pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited about that because honestly, recording lectures is a drag. It's not nearly as much fun as being in class with y'all. I kind of miss you guys. It's weird. But I do miss the interaction, the questions, the fun that we have in class. And hopefully y'all miss that too. But for some of you, you may love not having to deal with me on the regular. So, you know, I guess it's all in how you take it. But we are going to wind things down here, talking about managing sprawl, really kind of summarizing a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in class over the last 107 years that we've been in this semester, and hopefully sending you off with some good ideas about how to think differently about community development. Hopefully, as you leave class, you will be more critical in how you look at the world around you, and hopefully you'll think about how cities work, how they developed, and you'll catch yourself noticing things about your community that you maybe didn't before. So moving on here, talking about sprawl. Our development covers about 1 million acres annually, so that means 1 million acres of currently undeveloped land gets built on every year. So our footprint is expanding by about 1 million acres every year. This website here from Bloomberg is kind of a cool way to visualize what that looks like. And so, excuse me, if you look at land use across the country, you can see the breakdown between pasture and range, which is basically just open space, croplands, obviously the breadbasket here in the upper Midwest, we're growing a lot of foods. Special uses are things like military bases, other things like that, national parks, things like that. Miscellaneous is just unclassified, urban, and you can see kind of the urban centers. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like sort of nationally. And then if you scroll down, you can actually start to see how things are broken out by type. So overall, we have about 78 million acres of urban space, 168 million of special use, which again are those national parks, military bases, things like that. Just under 400 million acres, of cropland, 538 million of forested lands, and pasture is about 654 million. So you can see kind of the big urban spaces here in pink. So that's about 3.6% of the total contiguous United States is urbanized. So we tend to think of urban sprawl as an enormous issue, and it really is. But in the grand scheme of things, we're still using a pretty tiny percentage of the overall land in the United States for urban space. But again, we are sprawling out pretty radically, 1 million acres every year. So the special use is, again, national parks, military bases, things like that. So again, if we clumped it all together, it would kind of take up about that much of the country. And parks and wilderness is about 100 million acres, which is pretty great. So most commercial activities there are prohibited. Cropland is about 391 million total. It's about, again, 1/5 of the country. So if we clumped it all together, it would look like this across the Midwest. And actually what human consumption is much smaller because we use so much of our ag land for basically raising crops to feed critters that we then eat. Only about 77 million acres produces the actual food that we eat. So anyways, just gives you an idea again of how land gets broken down across the United States. So kind of a cool thing, worth taking a look at if you want to kind of nerd out on this stuff. So moving on. we are beginning to recognize that sprawl is a challenge, that we are building our communities in ways that are environmentally, economically, and socially unsustainable. We are recognizing that sprawling development contributes to air pollution, water pollution, traffic congestion, a loss of neighborliness and social cohesion. So how we build is materially impacting our lives in a negative way. And so we're understanding that we need to think differently about trying to limit sprawl and build in a different pattern. So that's kind of where we're headed with this, and some strategies to do that. So some of the barriers that exist to reducing sprawl and building differently is fragmented local government. As we talked about in the previous lecture, we have these various jurisdictions as communities incorporated outside of big urban centers and created their own land use policies, their own transportation plans, all of those things. Makes it really hard to develop cohesive plans for regions and overcome some of those regional challenges. We have a lack of regional planning and focus. Here, obviously in the Twin Cities, the Met Council is a regional governance, but that's pretty rare. So most of our big cities don't have that, and so you have lots of competing interests, lots of competing jurisdictions, not a lot of big picture thinking. Everybody's focused on their own parochial interests and don't really care about their neighbors too much. And we have competition for economic development. So cities, even in the same metro area, will compete with one another to land prospective businesses by offering free land, other tax incentives, and so forth. And so we have competition for new retailers, new businesses, those kinds of things, even at the local level. Suburban areas incorporated primarily to protect themselves from big city annexation. So again, as white flight happened, as the money left these urban areas, moving out to the suburbs, those suburbs incorporated to become their own cities because they didn't want to get sucked into the big central city. And that allowed them to, again, set their own taxation, set their own policies, have their own police force, all of those things that independent governments can do that decreases cooperation and collaboration across jurisdictions. Kept their taxes low because the people moving out there had money, and so they didn't need a lot of services from city government. Basically just, sweep the roads, plow the roads, keep a police force, intact, and we're good to go. So the taxes could be kept relatively low, didn't require a lot of services other than that. And so, but again, as those communities now are aging, becoming less desirable, new developments happening farther and farther out, the tax base in many of these suburbs is starting to decline, and they are starting to see some of the same challenges that we saw in inner cities in the 60s and 70s. So the reason that so much development is happening farther and farther out is because there's lower land prices. As you get farther out, you can find cheaper land. It's easier to buy the big chunks of land that most developments happen in now. So something like this kind of development here highlighted in green, to find a big piece of land that big is hard to do in inner cities. You've got to go out to the suburbs to find big chunks of land to do these massive developments that are more economical given our current conditions. There's lower restrictions. So suburban communities and unincorporated areas tend to have fewer development restrictions. So you have more flexibility in what you build and how you build it. Makes it easier for developers to get product on the ground than working within the restrictions that many cities have. The process is easier, approvals are easier to get. So, it just makes it more attractive for developers to do things farther out. And because you can assemble land more easily, you can build at scale, and you're not trying to retrofit or clean up messes. So as we talked about with brownfield redevelopment, oftentimes our inner cities, the land that is available there is contaminated or has some issues that have to be dealt with before development can occur. And so if you're building out on former ag land or just what was open space before, it's much easier to put in new development without all of the headaches and hassles. So all of that's contributing to suburban sprawl, making it easier and more attractive to build farther out and more cost effective as well. So what do we do about this? How do we make the transition to more thoughtful, compact growth. We need to look at issues of redevelopment and infill, as we spoke about, retrofitting our suburban spaces. So the example of this picture here is your conventional, big box strip center, lots and lots and lots of parking. If we think differently about how we use that space, we can start to put a lot of other things on those parking spaces. So we still have our big box retail here, but we've added in some multifamily, some mixed use development on the road frontages. And what we've done is taken what had been a very pedestrian, unfriendly, unattractive, unappealing place and made it into a pretty nice space. We've got street trees and green space and open space. By adding these buildings right up on the street frontage, we've improved the pedestrian accessibility and comfort. We've made it a more welcoming place to be. And so we've turned what had been just an auto-oriented sprawl into a compact pedestrian-oriented, pseudo downtown. So it's a way to make existing development more attractive, more cost-effective, because you still have the same water and wastewater lines and roads and everything else serving this style of development that you did over here, but you're getting a lot more revenue because you have a lot more stuff over here, a lot more tax-paying properties than you do over here with all of these parking lots. So again, we're using land more effectively and more efficiently by turning parking spaces into living spaces. Part of this comes from education. We need to understand the economics of sprawl and how economically unsustainable it is. So if you look at things like the hours lost commuting, almost 8 hours, almost a full work day every week is spent commuting. So that's a significant amount of time that people could get back in their lives if we had more compact, more efficient developments. Cost of owning a car. If you don't have to own a car, you can save a ton of money. You can save carbon emissions, all of those things, and you have more jobs. So you're actually, with more efficient, more dense development, you have more jobs, less congestion, better air quality, better water quality. All of those things are positives when we think differently about how we grow. So the cost of car ownerships in 2015 is about almost $9,000 a year. So again, if you took that money and used it towards rent because you lived in somewhere that either had transit access or you could ride your bike or walk to work, that $9,000 a year would go a long way to paying a higher rent or a higher mortgage payment. Or you could spend that money on vacations, right? You could rent a car when you needed to drive somewhere for, like if you wanted to drive to Colorado for vacation, you could rent a car with the money you're saving on car ownership a lot of times over. So again, thinking differently about our relationship to automobiles and the costs associated with automobiles is a great way to get people thinking about compact development, more efficient development. Suburban sprawl is bad for our health. Bad for our pockets. So if you look at, this is data from Canada, and so some of the hidden costs of suburban sprawl, vehicle collisions, rising obesity, diabetes, chronic illnesses are all impacts of our suburban sprawl and auto-oriented development. We are subsidizing the costs of roads, so even people that don't drive or don't own cars, their taxes are impacted by the costs of roads that we're spending to support suburban sprawl. You can see the increased cost out here. So just some expenses that we don't ever think about as well. So we also need to think about connectivity. If we want to build more efficient communities, we want to build communities that can evolve and change over time. If we build communities that are connected internally, that will allow for, one, reduced traffic congestion. It will improve traffic flow. It will improve accessibility. It will improve the opportunity for pedestrian access. And it will make communities, again, more adaptable to change over time. So if you look at the picture here, right, your conventional sort of suburban neighborhood that's just got cul-de-sacs and sprawl, everything comes out to one intersection point, right? So all of these homes and all of this traffic end up coming out to one intersection, creating a massive traffic jam on that one intersection. And to get from homes in this style of neighborhood to the school or to the shopping mall, you have to drive, right? You can't walk between all of these different developments. Whereas in this style of development patterns, you have shopping in the middle, you've got the school, it's kind of far, so it's far from the apartments and everything else, so it's not super easy to get to, but you have multiple ways to get through this neighborhood, so you're not putting all the traffic onto one intersection. So if you're driving through here, you can get out in multiple areas. So you're gonna have narrower streets, easier streets to get around, more pedestrian access in this style of neighborhood than you do in this side of the street. So just, again, ways we can think about making communities more accessible, more adaptable, and reduce car dependency. So reducing cul-de-sacs, reducing dual entry subdivision, so having that limited entry also makes things safer in the event of a disaster and the need to evacuate. So again, there's lots of benefits to having connectivity and improving connectivity in our neighborhoods. Adequate public facilities only allows for development to happen when public facilities such as infrastructure, schools, and so forth are adequate to support it. So that makes sure that an inventory is done on the existing conditions of infrastructure before new development can occur. And that means that cities aren't then stuck with the burden of trying to expand necessary infrastructure to support needed development. So it puts the burden on developers to prove that they're either adding to the capacity if they need to do that, or that the adequate capacity already exists to support their proposed development. So that ensures compact development adjacent to existing uses, so the cost of expanding infrastructure is reduced, you're taking maximum advantage of existing infrastructure capacity, and you're just building in a way that's more cost effective and efficient. So this example here is just a study on what adequate facilities ordinances look like and how that works. And so the point of it is to ensure that an adequate level of public facilities and services is available to efficiently serve new growth. It protects existing residents from overburdened facilities, declining quality of service, and increasing debt resulting from growth. It balances the timing of private development with planned public improvements, and it encourages compact, contiguous, or infill developments and redevelopments that uses infrastructure efficiently. So the point of doing this is to make sure that any new development that occurs is actually paid for the people actually doing the development, so that existing residents aren't subsidizing service to new residents. Cities are also looking to things like density bonuses in exchange for public benefits. And so what that does is it allows for higher densities in the desired development zones when other public goods are provided. So in this case example here, right, the developer could build into this yellow footprint here. So they could build a 3-story building that had a mix of residential, commercial uses. But if the developer agrees to provide a daycare, a public bus shelter, and public art, they then are allowed to actually build more than they otherwise would. So yes, there's a cost to them of providing these public amenities. However, the benefit they get from the added development potential offsets the costs of those public facilities. So it's a way to encourage appropriate development and get quality development, and also public benefits from developers. So it's a great win-win for the city because they're getting development in the areas they want it, and they're also getting additional public goods that they otherwise would not get. You want to think about designing for renovation and reuse. The video here is linked in the module, so I'm not going to show it here, but think about things like parking garages and how currently they're just kind of an eyesore, typically pretty ugly, not super useful, but they can be intentionally designed to allow for adaptability and reuse down the line. So we need to think about evolution in our cities and how they can change over time, and to build in a way that allows for that change. So we talked about in previous lectures, we talked about big box stores and how inefficient they are in terms of trying to adapt them to alternative uses from being a big box store. So when Walmart closes down and relocates, you're left with this building that really can't be repurposed. So thinking about how we design our structures and design our developments to allow for evolution over time is super important, and a critical way that we can enhance sustainability by allowing change over time. So form-based zoning, again, I won't link to the video, it's linked in the module, but that's really about zoning based on the mass, appearance, and siting of buildings rather than the use. Most zoning is based on use, so it's a single family home and that's all it can be. It is a multifamily home and that's all it can be. It is a commercial space and that's all it can be. With form-based zoning, you're not worried about what's actually happening inside of the building. You're worried about how the building relates to those buildings around it and the larger neighborhood. So this building here on the corner that I'm circling with the pointer could be multifamily housing, it could be retail, it could be a restaurant with some multifamily behind it, it could be any number of things. We don't care as long as it looks like this and relates well to the buildings around it. And so you typically start from a less intense uses, so smaller buildings and so forth, transitioning up to your very high density, high intensity uses in the urban core. So again, it allows for that flexibility and adaptability of our buildings and our communities to change over time, rather than a strict single use that can only be a single family home for now and forever, or whatever it is. And transect zoning goes along with form-based codes, and in this you're actually transitioning from your least intense open space, predominantly natural lands, wilderness, undeveloped, untouched parks and open space, into your rural land, which is farming with maybe homes on the farms, very, very, very low density, low intensity uses, to your more suburban, predominantly still single family homes, low density, but you might have some businesses intermixed here, and then into your more urban spaces, again transitioning to higher densities, more intensive uses, but again you're worried more about what the buildings look like and how they relate to one another rather than specific uses. And it kind of looks like this, right? Transitioning from your open space to your very dense, very urban space. So we talked about transfers of development rights and purchase of development rights. That's a way to push development to our more desired zone. So by basically segregating the development rights on property from the property itself. So if you're going to do a transfer of development rights, the farmer would sell the development rights to his land, allow for more dense, more intense uses in the desired development zone. Farmer makes some money, also is protected by rising land costs because now his land can no longer be developed on, and the developer benefits from having the opportunity to build more than he or she otherwise would because they purchase those rights from the farmer. Urban growth boundaries are basically building a hypothetical wall around your city, looking at 20-year growth expectancies and how much the city might grow within that 20-year period, drawing a line in the sand and saying all new development has to happen within this boundary. And what that does is it creates a hard line that developers know they have to work within. So they look to build on infill redevelopment opportunities and vacant sites within the existing urban footprint, and it reduces sprawl because you can't build outside of that urban growth boundary. Downside to that is that it does increase costs because you're limiting the supply. So it can make development more difficult, make it more expensive, and make affordable housing a bigger issue. Some other things we can do is look at mixing land uses. So again, mixing our retail and residential uses together, building more in sort of the traditional neighborhood style, like downtown River Falls, where you have your commercial area downtown that has the mixed uses there. You've got some residential above the retail. You've got 2nd Street, which is kind of that transition zone where you've got some mixed residential and commercial space, and then you get into the single family homes behind that. And a lot of those single family homes now have been transitioned into multifamily rentals. So you have a mixed residential pattern, and you've got a nice grid network of streets. So as potentially the commercial area of Main Street expands eastward into that residential area, that grid network would support the transition to more commercial uses. So along 2nd Street, you may see over time more of those homes being transitioned into commercial space, and over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you might see that commercial space continue to expand eastward into the neighborhood, and those buildings transition to commercial uses. So that's that pattern of development, that grid pattern allows for that. Whereas if you look at sort of more conventional suburban sprawl, those neighborhoods won't ever be anything but single family homes. There's no way that a commercial business would be viable at the end of a cul-de-sac, way down inside some single family residential neighborhood. So it's the pattern of development in River Falls allows for evolution over time. More compact and efficient development creates identity. It fosters distinctive, attractive communities with a sense of place. They're more walkable, so people are more likely to be out and about, meeting their neighbors, getting to know people that live around them, building that sense of community and connection to place that's so important for sustainability. Building more compactly will preserve open space. It will preserve farmland, critical environmental areas. We'll use our existing infrastructure more efficiently. We will strengthen existing developments. It will allow for a variety of transportation choices. So there's the density to support transit, to support buses and light rail and all of those things. People aren't dependent on their automobiles to get all around everywhere they go. It just makes it more cost effective as well. It also helps to make the development process more predictable and fair, because people understand what the expectations are and they know how to build, where to build, what to build, and they can meet those expectations. And it makes for a more collaborative community. So you're thinking differently about how you develop and ensuring that the community is engaged in the development process. So, wow, that's all I got. That was a quick one today, but that's okay because, again, we're kind of on the downhill slide. So have a great day. I will post, what is the activity for today? I don't know that I have one. I guess I don't have one for this one, so that's all right. But anyways, we will wrap it up on the next lecture. Have a great day.